This is Amanda Dawn Christie telling you that if you're interested in radio, AM, FM, shortwave, amateur radio, pirate broadcasting, and more, you won't want to miss the International Radio Report every Sunday morning at 10:30 on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal and online at ckut.ca.
Welcome, everyone, to the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal. It is Sunday, July the 3rd, and we wish all our American friends a happy 4th of July coming up tomorrow. And here in Canada, we're still celebrating July 1st yes. Weekend, making a long weekend out of it. So I know there's a lot of tourists in town. The Jazz Fest is going on in Montreal, so it's a busy time, and we're getting that typical humid weather starting up here in Montreal. So it's a good time to be here. So we say hello to anybody that might be visiting from out of town as well. My name's Sheldon. I'm here with Jill. We are here every Sunday morning with 30 minutes of news and information from the world of radio. You can reach us by email, radioreport@yahoo.com. Our show is live streaming and archived on the website of CKUT Radio in Montreal, ckut.ca. Our Facebook page is International Radio Report. We welcome Rodney, Nico, Joseph, and Rodney, two Rodneys this week, 806 members. And our YouTube channel, which you can find International Radio Report, has 659 subscribers, and you can find past editions of our show there, including a new show each week, not too long after you hear it on the air. So we will get going with a few interesting stories from around the world this week, starting off over in France, where there's some interesting developments on both the TV and radio scene.
Yep, so French TV and radio stations strike over plan to end the license fee. This is by Emma Morgan, The Connection, and via Mike Terry and Glenn Hauser's World of Radio. Staff at France Télévisions and Radio France went on strike on June 28th in protest against plans to scrap the Contribution pour l'audiovisuel, a public license fee. The fee, also called the Redevance audiovisuelle, currently funds France Télévisions, France 2, France 3, France 5, Radio France, France Inter, France Info, France Culture, France Musique, and the art and international media such as France 24 and Radio France International. One of President Emmanuel Macron's re-election pledges was the elimination of the Redevance audiovisuelle, which cost around 23 million metropolitan French households 138 euros a year. Precise details of the move to scrap the fee have yet to be fully clarified, but a law containing the legislation for it is expected to be put to Parliament now that MPs have begun their terms following the legislative elections. This plan is viewed by opponents as a threat to the independence of the channels in question. It has also raised concerns over funding of French television and radio stations. Some 3.2 billion euros of the 3.8 billion euros which goes into funding these organizations comes from the redevance. The remaining 600 million euros being provided by the state to make up for the non-payment of the most deprived households. The government has said that the end of the license fee will not lead to a drop in funding, but it is unclear where the money will be sourced if not from viewers and listeners. Unions have also said that eliminating the redevance means impoverishing and jeopardizing public audiovisual media by shifting it into the state's general budget, and therefore making it vulnerable to arbitration and incessant political pressures. The prospect of the dismantling of these public services for the benefit of the private sector where media moguls rule is unbearable. It is with regards to the level of independence and the quality of information shared by the media that we measure the maturity of a democracy. A 2021 American study on the state of media in 23 different countries has shown that significant investments in news organizations, in addition to structures designed to protect their political and economic independence, is conducive to a healthy democracy. The strike has meant that music replaced the usual morning programs on radio stations such as France Info, France 2 was showing repeats. The strike is led by CGT, CFDT, and many other different unions, with a demonstration expected at midday in Montparnasse, Paris. Protesters will head in the direction of the Assemblée Nationale. France Info website operations will also be disrupted, as those of France 24. Unions are calling for a universal tax for audiovisual media, which will be at least equal to the current amount, as well as dedicated funding to fight against fake news. Well, that resumes in a few things what I always say when we start thinking of media, of news, and of news outlets, of radio stations and TV as a dollar amount. It's always a huge problem because we need to have these going alive and well because we need to have fair sources of news. It is interesting because here in North America, we are not used to that, thinking that, you're going to pay a fee for a license to have media or radio and have to do that. So, it was like a couple of weeks ago when we talked about the BBC also with their license fee removal. I mean, it seems to be something that is going on in many countries. And then where does the money come from after that?
Yeah, I think we're not really used to something like that. We have the one national network, which is in English and French, both radio and television. But the rest of the networks across the country are all independently owned broadcasters. So we're not familiar. I mean, CBC Radio Canada is paid for by us, but it's indirectly. We're not being given a bill to pay every year. It is paid for from tax dollars. So it's coming out of one big pot rather than being specifically tagged, to each individual. But this is something that's much more common in other countries. So we're seeing two of the major ones, Britain and France, both changing up that system. And like you said, when the dollars aren't there, it's going to have a major impact on what people are able to hear. And speaking of the BBC, we have a little bit of news. We know we have a lot of people that are known as QSL hunters. For those not familiar with that term, radio stations around the world for many, many years, going back decades, would accept reception reports from listeners, and in turn, the stations would send the listener a confirmation card. Basically, it was like a little postcard or maybe a letter or something like that, and maybe a few little trinkets or souvenirs from the station. Well, that's something that's gone by the wayside with a lot of stations. Postage costs, staffing issues, that sort of thing. There are still some stations that do QSL, but what's become a new tool for QSL hunters is eQSLs, or electronic QSLs. It's something that's showing up in the ham radio world. Well, now it's starting to show up with some of the broadcasters as well. And Chris Greenway, who's with BBC, I believe, via Glenn Hauser's World of Radio, is reporting that the BBC is now accepting online reception reports and issuing eQSLs. So there is a website, eqsl.tools.bbc.co.uk. And we'll put that link on our Facebook page for you. Now, I took a look at it, and we were talking about it before the show. It does look like it's sort of a robot operation. You file your report online, and some people were saying they were getting the answer back, the eQSL, quite quickly. It does seem to be some sort of automated system. I don't know if that means the reports are actually being checked or not, or you send a report and it just automatically fires off an eQSL for you.
That's interesting. I'm going to have to try to
get
one with a fake report and see if it actually verifies anything, because they could kind of just verify frequencies and times if they match.
I forget exactly how much detail they're putting into the card as well. I'm not sure. Are they putting the transmitter site and all of that, or is that up to you to input that?
I think that's us to input that, but no, that's interesting. I'm going to have to try it. I'm going to get I got the real QSLs for those that, unfortunately, I'm sorry. I know you guys are jealous of that, but
yeah, but ours have dust on them. They go way back.
Yes, they do.
From when we were able to get cards from so many of the stations, but
it's interesting.
Yeah, things change.
Because there's one thing that I wonder about this is why take the time to do this? And I was wondering if, just out of curiosity, they didn't do it just because it's a measure of audience in some way.
That's possibly one thing, and probably one thing, I would think, and maybe just a little bit of PR, audience relations sort of thing. If it's something that they can do very easily
Yeah.
without much cost associated with it, then, it'll keep some people happy. Anyways, nice to see that they've done something.
Yep.
It's more than some stations are doing right now. So
Absolutely.
if you're a fast food junkie, you might be very worried about the headline in this story. It says chip shortage. No, Frito-Lay's has not gone on strike. We're not talking about potato chips here. We're talking about computer chips and electronic chips. So the headline, chip shortage likely to cause low Tecsun inventory. This coming from the SWLing blog. This is Tom Witherspoon's site. It says, I received a message from a reader recently regarding the Tecsun PL330 radio, shortwave radio. They pointed out that Tecsun listed the PL330 as discontinued, but I've confirmed that this is not the case. This is simply a poor translation or choice of words. The PL330 is still very much in production. However, I also learned the global chip shortage is hitting Tecsun and most other radio manufacturers quite hard right now. I checked with Anna at Anonco, and she confirmed that they still have inventory of the PL330 and other Tecsun models, but the chip shortage will almost certainly affect radio availability once her existing inventory is depleted. I'm not sure any of us would be surprised to learn this because the chip shortage is having impact across multiple industries, and modern DSP shortwave receivers are very chip dependent. I follow economic news pretty closely, and most experts agree that the chip shortage may create issues for the next year or even two. Indeed, there's even a shortage of chips to make chips. No worries and no need to panic, though, as we'll all get through this. I would suggest not waiting to bite the bullet if you've been planning to purchase a new DSP-based portable radio in the near future. So, Gilles, you're a techie computer guy. I guess you can give a little more background into this.
Yeah, well, first of all, these radios, most radios today, actually, almost, I'd say 80% of the receivers you can buy online, the portables, have a DSP-based chip. The radio has a little integrated circuit that is a full radio within a chip, and that has been kind of the basics of most receivers lately, as it probably makes these receivers less expensive and they perform really well. Now, of course, every type of electronics is having problems with chip. If you buy a computer, you'll see that maybe your favorite computer is not going to be available. Now we see it hit with radio. There are manufacturers, also other manufacturers, that did discontinue some models of receivers because they just couldn't get the parts. So ICOM was hit. C-Crane is hit also with a couple of models that they discontinued just because can't get parts, and can't even get parts to get them fixed if it breaks down. So it's having an impact, and it's interesting. Apparently, according to some people, there shouldn't be any shortwave radios sold out there because nobody's listening. But I guess people must be buying them because there's going to be maybe a shortage.
Yeah, there should be a whole bunch of stock sitting around, that's been there for years because nobody would want them. But we seem to think that's not necessarily the case. And I think we'll get to a story in the second half here that may prove some of what we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's been some interesting propagation, and you had some interesting results from it as well.
Yep, I actually this week had the opportunity to hear a station on FM from Orlando, Florida. And, I'm living in Montreal, Canada. So that's kind of far away for the FM band. I've tried the FM band to DX in the past. I've never had anything else than maybe a couple of 100 kilometers of distance from sometimes when there's tropospheric ducting, stuff like that. And it all started with one little detail. I was listening to 107.9, the WVPS station out of Burlington, Vermont. And every 15 to 20 minutes, for 20 to 30 seconds, there was some pop music overpowering the station and then going away. So I thought that was kind of curious. Then I go on the Facebook group and I see somebody mentioning that he finds that there's some weird, funky propagation going on FM. He never heard stations further away than about 100 miles. Now he's hearing a station that's 1,000 miles away. I was curious. I had to turn on my radio and start tuning around. It's a little tough in Montreal because we don't have a lot of spaces where there's empty static just, to get any stations. There's too many stations in the band already. Plus, you need a good radio in Montreal because all the stations are so powerful that most radios actually don't work well to DX. So my Sangean HDR14 is pretty good at it. It's that little HD radio that I purchased a couple of years ago. And I start tuning around and I hear some stations, but on 96.5 I hear salsa music. And then I hear Spanish, and on the display, the RDS display says WOEX Orlando. And I'm super impressed. And at times, it came in for 3 to 4 minutes at a time, super clear, like if it was a local station here in Montreal. And all of that faded away about 30 to 45 minutes after I heard the station.
Welcome to the world of sporadic e-skip.
Yep.
The time that is right, the weather is right. There's lots of factors that kick this into gear. And often, even though if your band is crowded, sometimes, like you said, the Vermont public radio station is very strong here in Montreal, yet when e-skip is intense, it can even black out local radio stations, and you'll have distant stations right on top of your existing stations if the propagation is intense enough. So it was a good period for it. I had to scramble to try to find a good radio on FM, though. I don't have really good ones for FM. I need to get into my car. That's my best FM radio, is the one in the car, and it has the RDS that IDs the station that pops up on the screen. So that's really helpful too. That's a tool that we didn't maybe have in the past. That certainly helps when you're picking up these long distance FM stations.
There are kind of two periods that are good for e-skip, and of course the summer solstice and around the Christmas season, the winter solstice, are the two times where we can, but try it anytime, because sporadic e-skip can happen any time of the year, and that's why they call it sporadic.
There are a couple websites that people monitor and post up messages. We'll put some links up on our Facebook page where you can go and check those out, and just periodically go and look and see if there's activity, and then get to your radio, and you might get lucky. Sometimes it'll last for a long time. Sometimes it's very short. It can sometimes go way up in the band, like you mentioned, some effect on 107.9. Sometimes it's down below that, like if you'll see it in the low VHF 30 to 50 megs on 6 meters as well. So it's a really neat phenomena when it happens. You just got to be in the right place at the right time for it.
One easy website to remember if you want to try it and see if something's happening, check out dxmaps.com. You have maps and you have different frequencies and bands, and you can see the activity on VHF range. It's really nice. So if you see that 6 meters has activity all over the place, and including where you live on the map, you can try the FM DXing. It might work actually. So dxmaps. And what was happening with our sun, and by the way, sporadic e-skip is independent from the sun. It's another type of phenomena that happens when that happens. So our sun is rather quiet. There's 3 sunspot groups right now. Sunspot number at 40. Solar flux just below 100. So things have been quiet this week. There's been a little bit of geomagnetic activity. There was a geomagnetic storm on Tuesday, I believe. And we see that the sun is very active, but on the far side, there are several coronal mass ejections that have been visible. So maybe things are going to pick up in the next week or so. And there is a little solar wind from a northern coronal hole that could actually reach the Earth on July 6th. That could also create some instabilities in your radio listening experience. But you know what? Propagation is quite good. And there's only one way that you can really see what's happening or hear what's happening, and it's to turn on the radio and listen.
This is Janice of Dorval. The International Radio Report presents 30 minutes of news, information, and commentary on developments in the world of radio every Sunday morning at 10:30 on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal and online at ckut.ca.
Our next story, Gilles, you came across this article. It is from a gentleman named Tom Kent. It was an original work published by the Information Professionals Association. And they say a disclaimer: opinions expressed by authors are their own and do not necessarily reflect the views of or endorsement by the Information Professionals Association. I've never heard of that association to begin with, but it's quite an interesting story. It's very lengthy. We're not going to read through the whole thing. We will post up a link to it so you can read the whole thing, but we'll try to sort of summarize it for you. And it starts off by saying, as Vladimir Putin tightens his stranglehold on what his citizens see and hear, will radio once again become an effective way to get outside voices into Russia? I think we already know that that's true.
Yes.
And this article goes into a lot of detail as to what's currently happening and what could be happening if people realized what they could do, and in some cases doing it in a very affordable manner.
They are actually mentioning one of the U.S. agencies, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, that runs a lot of the shortwave outlets that are around the world. And there's a lot of money being pumped into that agency for things like Radio Free Asia, for example, or Radio Free Europe. And they're surprised that there's kind of a refusal on the part of that agency to put any shortwave outlets towards Russia or Ukraine. And they're mentioning that it costs $100 per hour and even less for them to have a program out, which is such a small amount when you think of the big budget that they have. And they are wondering why the agency itself doesn't seem interested. They have the impression, actually, the agency did reply back many times that they think that nobody's listening. And yet, they are mentioning, like, there's the Trans World Radio broadcaster, which is a religious broadcaster, that kind of mentioned at some point where they get hundreds of letters from Russia. And, we were talking before the recording about there's numbers here. If you get a letter from a listener, we know that there's very few people that take the time to write. So if you get a letter, there's definitely more people than that letter. So hundreds of letters, there's at least thousands, if not tens of thousands of listeners. There's some equation in there.
They mention how many people are really out there to listen. 1% of Russian households, for example, with shortwave radios, works out to about 55,000 families in a nation of 144 million. Russia probably has 25,000 to 35,000 amateur radio hobbyists. They obviously have shortwave equipment for their ham radio. An unknown number of people probably still listen occasionally to shortwave stations from around the world. Inexpensive radios with shortwave bands can be easily bought online from Russian dealers. So, this goes against some of the information that's being circulated out there of, there are nobody out there with radios anymore and nobody's buying radios. Why waste your time putting these programs on radio, on shortwave? We had a story last week of how AM transmitters are being shipped into the war zones to get stations back on the air for people who are, maybe living without electricity, without water, without what have you, because of the situation in Ukraine. They may have a small portable radio with them, and probably an AM, FM. And if the AM stations are put on the air with these transmitters, they have a much greater range than the FM stations. So you potentially could reach a lot more people with some of these AM broadcasts. Many
of them have been reactivated. Even Ukraine reactivated what they had shut down a few years ago on medium wave. And they're saying here, AM radio signals can travel for 1,000 miles or more at night, particularly. So you can actually send that news across the border when inside the border it's not possible to get the same news over the internet, where they've blocked off, Russia's blocked off pretty much everything that talks against the Vladimir Putin. So To get real news, you need a radio. It's almost the minimum requirement. They say here for shortwave, the WRMI general manager, Jeff White, said stations has received messages from listeners in Russia and Ukraine indicating that the signals are getting through. So there are listeners.
Yeah. Now, we had talked in the past about a station, well, a shortwave venture called Radio Truth for Russia had been launched by Russian-speaking activists based in Europe. Government broadcasters in Taiwan, Romania, Japan, as well as the Vatican are also on shortwave to Russia. But there was an independent group that was raising money through a GoFundMe. Now they've run out of money, and they were purchasing airtime to put actually Voice of America programming on shortwave using WRMI's shortwave transmitter site in Miami, Florida. Nice to hear that even though the money is run out, that Jeff White at the station, the general manager of WRMI, has decided to continue some of those broadcasts on his own dime, basically.
I think it's an indication that he also believes that people are listening and that it's needed to have these outlets so that the news gets through.
Yeah, and we never know how many people are listening to any broadcast, really. So, if it doesn't cost a lot and you have the ability to put it out there, why not do it?
Absolutely.
So anyways, I think you'll find this article really, really interesting. There's a lot more to it that we don't have time to go into all of it here today, but we'll put up the link for it. You can have a read of it, and do feel free to comment on it as well. We love to hear from you, your opinions and your feelings on the situation.
So we have upcoming ham radio contests.
We certainly do. We have contests going on over the weekend. The 13 colonies stations are on the air as we speak. And I happened to hear a few of them this morning out of the U.S. We have Canada Day contest has been running. Stations on the air for that were on July 1st. So we hope some of you had a chance to hear some of those. But coming up, we got a couple contests for you. Coming up on July 9th and 10th, 1200 Zulu to 1200 Zulu, July 9th to the 10th. Organized by the International Amateur Radio Union and the American Radio Relay League is the IARU HF World Championships. The objective is to support amateur self-training in radio communications, including improving amateur operating skills, conducting technical investigations, and intercommunicating with other amateurs around the world, especially IARU member society headquarter stations. So they'll be operating 1.8 through 28 megahertz ham bands. The modes, both phone and CW, may be used. For the contest, you're asked to contact stations only once per band and mode.
There's the Straight Key Century Club that is having the weekend sprintathon. 12 Zulu July 9th to 23:59 Zulu July 10th. Participants may sprint on 160 to 6 meters, excluding the work bands. Mode is CW.
And finally, the QRP Amateur Radio Club International is organizing the Summer Homebrew Sprint. It's just 3 hours long, 2000 to 2300 Zulu, July 10th, 160 through 10 meters. It's CW, Morse code only, but also only QRP, so low-powered stations only.
Lots of stuff to listen to, and we are out of time.
We certainly are. We thank you for tuning in. As we said at the beginning, have a good holiday weekend. July 4th coming up in the U.S. Tune the bands. There could be a lot of pirate activity.
Lots of pirates, yes.
Any major holiday seems to bring the pirates out, so check all the usual spots for that. And there should be, special programming coming up for some of the events, some other ham stations that'll be operating for special events throughout as well. So have fun with your radio. And drop us a note. Tell us what you've been listening to, or any comments you have on the stories. Would be great to hear from you. Radio report at yahoo.com if you want to use email. And our Facebook group, International Radio Report. Have a great week, everybody. We'll talk to you again next Sunday for the next edition of the International Radio Report on CKUT 90.3 FM in Montreal.
Bye-bye.